In 1860, the Royal Academy of Arts, the centre of the British arts establishment, received an application from a young artist who wanted to study at the Royal Academy schools. Teaching was an essential part of the role of fine arts academies, and the schools fulfilled the teaching mission of the Royal Academy, which had been founded nearly a century earlier, in 1768. The curriculum emphasized the study of classical models, encouraged the mastery of traditional techniques, and provided a rigorous and comprehensive artistic education in drawing, painting and sculpture, perspective and composition, and anatomy and life drawing, including from the nude figure. While the schools were often criticized for their conservatism and the variable quality of their teaching, they remained an important part of artistic education in Britain. Attendance at the schools did not just provide the young artist with training, it offered access to awards, scholarships and patronage, and brought professional prestige and influential connections. Candidates for the schools were required to provide a recommendation from a studio or art school where they had already studied, and samples of their work in the form of drawings. In this case, the candidate came with a positive testimonial from Thomas Heatherley, whose School of Art in London was well regarded, and the drawings were of a very high standard. So the Council of the Royal Academy approved the admission. The candidate's name was given on the application form and the drawings as A. L. Herford. So a letter was duly sent to A. L. Herford, Esquire, offering a place at the schools. The Council of the Royal Academy assumed that A. L. Herford was a keen young man, ready to join the ranks of the other keen young men who came to the schools to further their artistic education. And A. L. Herford was indeed young, keen, ambitious, a highly accomplished artist, a star student from a respected school of art, in every way ideally placed to benefit from the training available at the Royal Academy schools. But A. L. Herford was something more. She was a woman. Her name was Laura Herford. A. L. stood for Anne Laura. She was born in Altrincham in 1831, and was a member of a Unitarian family closely involved with education and art. Her mother, Sarah Smith Herford, had been a teacher and landscape painter, and her niece, Helen Allingham, partly inspired by Laura, would become a very successful genre painter. Laura showed artistic talent from a young age, and came to London in the 1850s to study art. She took drawing classes at Bedford College, drew from the antique in the sculpture galleries of the British Museum, and was a student at the private art school of the painter Eliza Fox, where life drawing classes were available to women students. She also studied, as we have heard, at Heatherley's School of Art, which, from its origins in the 1840s, had always admitted women students on the same terms as men. She was 29 years old, with years of solid artistic study and achievement behind her, when she applied to the Royal Academy schools. The immediate response of the Royal Academy when it was realized that a place had been offered to a woman was to try to keep her out. Academicians and officials hunted through the RA's Constitution and Book of Laws for the rule which declared that no woman could be admitted to the Royal Academy schools. They did not find it, because there was no such rule. Laura Herford knew this very well. She had made her application in such a way as to put the Royal Academy on the spot over precisely this point, and she succeeded. The gentlemen of the Royal Academy were soon forced to admit that there was no basis for excluding her, and on 16th July 1860 she arrived to take up her place, the first woman student at the Royal Academy schools. In 1863, giving evidence before a royal commission into the RA, the history painter Charles Landseer, brother of the more famous Edwin, who, as keeper of the Royal Academy, had responsibility for the running of the schools, was asked about this case. How, the chairman inquired, had the eligibility of women for admission been established? The way in which they were introduced was rather singular. We have a printed form, which we require to be filled up with the name, age, and residence, and so on, of the candidate. One of these printed forms was filled up with only the initials of the Christian name, so that, when the drawing was shown, it was judged entirely on its own merits, without our knowing that it was by a lady, as it turned out to be. It was then found out that there was no law against the admission of female students. Other women quickly followed Laura Herford's example. In 1861, 4 female students were admitted, in 1862, 6, and in 1863, 3. In that year, the RA tried to block any further women applicants on the grounds of lack of space, but such was the criticism from women students and their art schools that they were forced to reverse that policy in 1867, and female admissions resumed in 1868. By that time, the RA had moved from its old site in the National Gallery building on Trafalgar Square to new accommodation at Burlington House on Piccadilly, and the argument about limited space, long a favourite of the RA when it wanted, as it generally did, to reject suggested innovations, had lost any validity it might have had. In 1914, in his memoir The Inner Life of the Royal Academy, the painter George Dunlop Leslie described Laura Herford's admission as the beginning of what he called the invasion of the school by the ladies. The invasion was artfully planned. In 1860, 1 female was passed into the establishment by an entirely unsuspecting council. She had sent in her drawings with her Christian names in initials only. It was a good enough drawing. The laws were searched. Nothing was found in them prohibitory to the admission of females, and so she took her place amongst the boys. The drawing she made as a probationer was quite good, and in due course she received her ivory ticket with a copy of the laws, and took her seat in the school as a Royal Academy student. 2 or 3 more soon followed, and the number of female students kept on increasing until, I believe, at the present time, it considerably exceeds that of the males. Leslie was convinced that the admission of women had changed the Royal Academy, and not entirely for the better, although he did remark that it is very pleasant work teaching girls, especially pretty ones. But was he right to suggest that Laura Herford's admission to the Academy schools, and the supposed invasion that followed, had been artfully planned? It is certainly true that when Laura Herford applied to the Royal Academy schools, it was not a spontaneous act, nor one that should be understood in isolation as a personal triumph, although it certainly was that. It was rather the outcome of a sustained campaign by a network of active, committed, and organized women, determined to improve the status and opportunities of women in the arts. When the Royal Academy was established in London in 1768, 2 women were among the founding membership, Angelica Kauffman and Mary Moser. They can be seen at the back in this otherwise all-male gathering of Royal Academicians depicted in 1802. They were full members of the Academy, Royal Academicians, entitled to put the letters R.A. after their names. They were the last women to hold that status for 168 years. Not until 1936, with the election of Laura Knight, did another woman gain full R.A. membership. Before that, in 1922, Annie Swinnerton was elected as an associate of the Academy, which set an important precedent, but she was not a full member. There was nothing formal in the rules of the Royal Academy that banned women from becoming academicians, and nor, as we have heard, was there any rule banning them from the schools. It was simply accepted by the men who ran the place that the R.A. was for men, and that women, while welcome to exhibit there, had no place in the organization itself. Exclusion through custom and practice is every bit as powerful as exclusion through written rules. Before Laura Herford sought admission in 1860, women students simply did not apply, because they knew they would never be admitted, or even taken seriously, as applicants. In 1862, William Sandby wrote in his History of the Royal Academy of Arts that, when things finally changed and Laura Herford was admitted to the schools, no law was passed for the admission of female students, as none had previously existed forbidding it, and the only reason why they had not before obtained access to these means of study was that they had never applied for them. And over a century later, Sidney Hutchinson made the same claim in his History of the Royal Academy, published in the RA's bicentenary year of 1968, and issued in a second revised edition in 1986. There had, in fact, never been any regulation prohibiting the entry of women into the schools, but it would seem that, until then, none had ever applied. The fact remains that when a woman did eventually apply, the Royal Academy did not welcome this as a positive and long overdue development, but instead did its best to keep her out. Men in the Royal Academy and elsewhere may have been satisfied with the status quo, but women were not. As the 19th century wore on and demands for greater freedom and opportunities for women became louder and more pressing, the Royal Academy came under sustained pressure from feminist campaigners and women writers, artists and students to change its stance and open its doors to women. From around 1850, women began to make a point of attending public lectures at the schools, which had previously been all male affairs. The appearance of women at these lectures caused consternation. Henrietta Ward, who went on to become a successful painter, wrote that the then keeper of the Royal Academy schools made every effort to keep women out. He was unsuccessful, however, and the next lecture I attended had 5 women present, and the following one had 30. At this time, the artist Anna Mary Howitt wrote in a letter to her friend Barbara Bodichon, also an artist and feminist, of the effect attendance at a public Royal Academy lecture had on her.
Oh, how terribly did I long to be a man, so as to paint there. One seemed to be stepping into a freer, larger, and more earnest artistic world. A world, alas, which one's womanhood debars one from enjoying. Oh, I felt quite sick at heart. All one's attempts and struggles seemed so pitiful and vain. I felt quite angry at being a woman.
Howitt went on in this letter to quote what her mentor, Eliza Fox, who, as we have heard, would later be one of Laura Herford's tutors, said to her in response.
Nay, rather be angry with men for not admitting women to the enjoyments of this world. And instead of lamenting that we are women, let us earnestly strive after a nobler state of things. Let us strive to be among those women who shall first open the Academy's doors to their fellow aspirants. That would be a noble mission, would it not?
Denied educational opportunities in Britain, Howitt travelled to Munich to study and wrote of her experiences in An Art Student in Munich, published in 1853. Meanwhile, the Society of Female Artists had been founded in 1856 to promote the interests of women artists and provide them with more opportunities for exhibition, education, and the sale of their work. The first of its regular exhibitions was held in 1857. But many women regarded new and separate institutions for female artists, however valuable, as ultimately insufficient. They wanted access to the institutions that already existed, alongside and on equal terms with the men who had hitherto kept these things for themselves. As mentioned earlier, by the late 1850s, the Royal Academy was contemplating a move away from its cramped quarters on Trafalgar Square to new, larger premises. This move was eventually made in 1867, and the RA established itself in Burlington House on Piccadilly, which remains its home today. The debate over this move brought the Royal Academy into the public spotlight and subjected it to unprecedented scrutiny, and the women fighting for access to the RA mobilized to exploit this for their campaign. In March 1859, in connection with the proposed move, John Copley, 1st Baron Lyndhurst, who was the son of the painter John Singleton Copley, gave a speech praising the Royal Academy in the House of Lords. Lord Lyndhurst put great emphasis on the wide public benefits which the Academy brought to the whole of society, particularly through the schools, which he described as the great object of the institution. The schools are on a most liberal establishment. Any of Her Majesty's subjects have a right to be gratuitously instructed there. Nothing more is requisite for that purpose than the production of a certificate of good moral character and of a qualification in drawing. With those qualifications they are admitted to the schools and are instructed gratuitously during as long a period as they think proper to remain. This comment was seized upon by the women pressing for access to the Royal Academy, who wasted no time in pointing out that, despite Lord Lyndhurst's claim that any of Her Majesty's subjects could study at the RA, in practice half of the population, the female half, was excluded. A letter-writing campaign to the press followed, with letters such as this one quickly appearing in newspapers and journals.
Perhaps Lord Lyndhurst is not aware that a considerable class, who yet consider themselves entitled to be included as Her Majesty's subjects, those of her own sex, are totally excluded from participation in this gratuitous instruction, which he justly esteems as so valuable to the young artist, and must either pay a high price for such teaching as can be obtained for money, or altogether lack the systematic study of drawing, which alone can enable them to take a fair position in their profession. Instead of enjoying the opportunity of studying for years under the superintendence of the most eminent masters, they must struggle alone through all the difficulties and discouragements which only artists can fully estimate, with no help beyond their own talent and determination.
In April 1859, the writer, campaigner and feminist Harriet Martineau, who was in direct contact with Laura Herford and her allies, published a wide-ranging article in the Edinburgh Review on female industry, which also took issue with Lord Lyndhurst's statement, commenting that women are not at present included in this our principal National School of Arts, though no class of students would derive greater advantage from it. This deficiency should be remedied. Next came a public petition for women's admission to the Royal Academy schools, organised by Barbara Bodichon and signed by 38 women artists, which was sent to the 40 Royal Academicians, appealing to them as artists who have benefited from the teaching at the RA schools not to exclude women from those same advantages. The petition was printed in the Athenaeum, the Art Journal, and the English Woman's Journal, and was also widely reported in the general press. The Academy rejected the petition on the usual grounds of lack of space. Most dramatically, Lord Lyndhurst's speech led directly to Laura Herford making her historic application to the RA schools. She wrote to Lord Lyndhurst, taking issue with his comments. He responded sympathetically, and a correspondence ensued which led to the involvement, behind the scenes, of the President of the Royal Academy himself, Sir Charles Eastlake, and to a plan being made to force the RA's hand on the issue of female admissions. Charles Eastlake was a painter, primarily of historical and religious themes, a former student at the Royal Academy schools, and, by 1859, an eminent figure in the British art world. He had been president of the Royal Academy since 1850, which was also the year in which he became Sir Charles, having previously been secretary of the government's Fine Arts Commission and the keeper, and subsequently the first director, of the National Gallery. In 1849 he had married Elizabeth Rigby, who was an art critic and art historian of strong character and powerful intellect, who undoubtedly exercised a great influence on her husband's professional work. They were, in fact, an artistic power couple, and Elizabeth's influence almost certainly played some part in Sir Charles's sympathetic reaction to Laura Herford's representations. According to Ellen Clayton's 1876 book, English Female Artists, Sir Charles Eastlake told Miss Herford that there was no rule against the admission of female students, and it was, partly from his advice, that she made her application in the form in which she did. When the Art Journal reported on the matter in September 1860, it also credited Eastlake with a role in the affair, reporting that the lady subsequently applied to the President, who so interested himself in the matter that she has obtained permission to study there, and it is supposed, on tolerably good authority, that the schools will in future be open to female students under proper regulations. Eastlake's tacit support and the firm knowledge that there was no rule barring women from the schools eased the path for the women who were pushing for female admissions. But in the end, a woman had to do the job for herself and for other women, and apply. And that woman was Laura Herford. Ellen Clayton wrote of her as the daring intruder who for months had to endure the discomfort of being the only representative of her sex, the object of curiosity and criticism more or less severe, and the target of opposition, prejudice, and wonderment, despite all of which she persisted, and opened the way for the women who followed her. Even the grudging George Dunlop Leslie, who held Laura Herford responsible for triggering a female invasion of the schools, conceded that her action in thus obtaining her studentship was an entirely disinterested one, undertaken solely with a view to the advancement of female artists. It was not all plain sailing for women at the Royal Academy after Laura Herford's admission in 1860. The numbers of women students grew only slowly, and although they quickly won a substantial share of the Academy's prizes and medals, they were marginalized in terms of the facilities and teaching available to them. Above all, they were denied access to the life class until 1893. Their battle had also been won just as the Royal Academy was losing its position of prestige and dominance in the British arts world, challenged by the rise of other institutions and by changes in the art market. Women artists themselves did not universally see the Royal Academy as their first choice for tuition. Many regarded the teaching as too conservative and chose the Slade School of Art, which accepted female students from 1871, as the more progressive institution, while the rise of high-quality art education for women in cities such as Manchester and Glasgow challenged not only the dominance of the Royal Academy, but of London itself. However, in terms of the Royal Academy schools, despite occasional setbacks and the very slow progress that ensued, the success achieved by Laura Herford and her allies meant that the breakthrough had been made by women and for women. Laura Herford herself completed her training at the Royal Academy schools and went on to be a successful portrait and genre painter, exhibiting widely in oils and watercolour. Her career was sadly cut short by her premature death from a heart condition at age 39 in 1870.